Danielle Deulen, assistant professor of poetry at the University of Cincinnati, is both a poet and an essayist. Her collection of poems, Lovely Asunder, won the Miller-Williams Arkansas Poetry Prize, and her memoir, The Riots, won the AWP's Prize in Creative Nonfiction and the GLCA New Writers Award. And both these books were published in 1 year. And though these awards are notable and important, I don't think it's her awards that are most worth noting today. We should instead note the raw immediacy of her prose, vivid images that startle and stay. We should mention her understated yet monumental scenes, slivered light in a doorway, unripe carrots eaten fresh, grit and all, flashing lights splayed on eyelids. We should acknowledge the crafted tension with which she packs her words, words that hold quaking at the promised return of an angry father, quaking at the unsaid love on a scenic drive through aspens. And we should remark on the fierce sincerity with which she tackles unwieldy topics. But most importantly, we should celebrate the transcendence that she lifts from tragedy and savor the honest redemption left behind. Please welcome Ms. Danielle Deulen.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been very nice to get to know those of you I've met so far, and thank you especially to Patrick Madden for inviting me and Scott for coordinating wherever he might be. I'm very pleased to be back in Utah where there are fabulous mountains. I'm going to read just a few poems to start, and then I'm going to read a longer essay from the book Aperture, and then end with just one new poem. And this first poem is just the first poem in the book, and I always like to think that the first poem in a book is always the point of inquiry that begins at the beginning of any emotional trajectory for the book. And I had been reading Pablo Neruda's Book of Questions, and so I ended up putting this at the first because it's just entirely questions. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. Interrogation. How did you get here in the wet garden on your bloody knees? And where is your mother's brown dress smelling of nickels and butter? Why is your father yelling from his bedroom window? And what of the gun? Why can't you untangle your ankles from the cucumber vines? How does it feel to press your small, hot cheek to their leaves? Can you hear the evening sprinklers start up like gossip over the dry lawns? Soon the whole world will be shining with lies. Doesn't that make it easier? Can you feel the tall pines leaning away, closing the clouds like white curtains? And the neighbors? Where's the old woman who always keeps one yellow eye on her nectarine tree? Why do you dream of finding the corpses? Why do your father's eyes fill up with blackness? And what of the gun? Why do you press your hand to your chest when he aims? Don't you know it won't keep him from shooting? And where is your mother's brown dress? Can't it hear you crying? Why won't it come home? When his bullets pierce the tree instead of your body, can you sense your face going suddenly calm as the scent of the neighbor's lilac drifts toward your pulse in the garden and hangs itself over your head as if it had prayed for you all of its life and finally found you? How do you know, without the words to say it, that you are the summation of a lifetime of desire? And when you know, do the stars emerge from blackness or arrive like shots in the sky? The second poem I'll read is For My Sister in the River, which is partly autobiographical. My sister and I used to like to play baptism in the Columbia River. We used to go swimming there, and for some reason we thought it was really fun, so we would just dunk each other on the water and be like, "You're saved," and dunk each other out, "You're saved again." You know, it was just like kind of over and over again. This starts off with a quote from John 1:23, and the quotes, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness for my sister in the river." I was trying to be cruel when I threw the rhododendrons in her hair. It was spring and the petals were sticky, bruised, and crimson against her dark hair, but instead of crying, she laughed, spun herself into this photograph of a girl dancing in circles so fast her body blurs, her head a deep magenta and earth. My sister is small and stronger than she looks. In a decade, she'll arrive late at the door, her lip split, eyes swollen shut, her baby girl blushed with tears wound around her like a delicate vine. She'll walk into the kitchen, sit down on the linoleum, say, "I'll never go back." I'll want to believe I hear her voice, filling with her voice from the river we swam as girls, where we'd take turns being John the Baptist, drenching each other in the muddy tide. Underwater, I could feel my sister's skinny arms straining to pull me through currents, lift me through the dark surface, press her fingers to my forehead, say, "You're forgiven, you're healed." We were too powerless to be prophets. I don't mean halos appeared above us in the river, or the kitchen was lit by anything other than streetlight lost from the roads outside, just that we knew, without psalm or song to guide us, we had to save each other. And one more from this collection. Sort of the emotional background of this, which I know is sort of a bizarre thing to say, but I was living in New York during 9/11, and there was this really strange sensation directly afterwards where everybody was a little bit shocked and in a little bit of a state of trauma. You'd be on the trains and people would be, everybody was very silent, and if there was like some loud noise, everybody would jump. But you also got this sort of sense that if anything bad were to happen to you in the city at that moment, like an entire crowd of people would like pummel them. You weren't really afraid of getting mugged or anything like that because everybody was suddenly had so much empathy for everybody else. And so it was kind of an amazing time to be there. Anyways, the time period that I'm talking about in this poem does come from that time, though you wouldn't know. There's nothing about 9/11 in it. It's called Plum. At the end of the platform, a woman plays cello, the low notes echoing through the tiled station and up the stained cement stairs, out through the turnstiles. It is early February, and plum blossoms open on their black limbs, ready for something I am not. It's morning, and already I imagine walking home in darkness, unlocking the door, while my landlady, who lives in the apartment below, watches, her eye on me from the threshold as I climb the stairs, go in, stand there in the hallway, no one to speak to. I watch water tremble between rails of an approaching train. This is a practice of longing. I want to hold it the way I hold returned letters, the citrus taste of skin, stars so deeply embedded in sky I can't see them. Lunar New Year and plum blossoms carved into jade to signify resurrection. On the Lower East Side, people sweep their houses of last year's bad luck. This is the shallow knowledge I bite down on, like the strip of wood issued to ancient Chinese soldiers used for clenching between the teeth to ensure against speaking in a surprised attack. The word for this is Yanmi, but the translator, a native speaker of Chinese, misread the character as Mei, and against sense and warfare took the meaning to be, hold a plum in the mouth. Imagine the soldiers, linear and silent, climbing the enemy's stone walls, only moonlight on their smooth foreheads, their black hair, each with a plum in his mouth. Imagine the overripe fruit disintegrating into sweet granules, the tart skin slipping over your tongue as you try to taste it harder, wear it through to nothing, because it reminds you of something you can't quite, distracted by the wall, the great thirst for spring gathering at the back of your throat. You see how I've made you the soldier, myself the sleeping enemy. Take pity on me. Take the pit from your mouth. Leave it on the threshold of my door, unspoken. Tomorrow we'll have something to make sense of. Switching gears. I'll be reading Aperture. It's a longer essay, but I think I'll keep within the time frame. Aperture begins with a definition of aperture, specifically in its optics. An opening, usually circular, that limits the quantity of light that can enter an optical instrument. I have seen my brother's eyes very few times. Eye contact is always brief. He tries to escape it whenever possible. Watching is an act of great importance for him. Merely glancing at him is an offense. Looking at him intently could result in a tantrum. His tantrums are huge vocal, physical attacks. He is the unstable element, eyes like lithium. Just look at it and it will explode. Flashes of dark brown, flecks of gold, or is it the way the light shines off them? What I know I've stolen through the years. In a yellowed photo of my brother taken a month after his birth, his pale face is blank, his pupils wide in the dim light. It's a close-up, just his face and shoulders. The dark afghan my mother made is wrapped around him loosely, fuzzes up around his chin. No one is holding him. He looks calm. A deeper perspective is impossible. The room blurs behind him. I think of the birth I wasn't alive to witness. My mother is glistening and exhausted beneath the high ceiling of their living room. Strands of her dark, long hair stick to her forehead and broad cheeks. She's delirious with pain. My father has a hand on her round stomach and a hand pressing open a medical book. He's sweating too, glancing between her face, the book, a clock chiming on the wall. It's been 36 hours and still no baby boy. 36 hours is too long. They know that much. Too late to find a midwife, too poor to pay for a hospital. She has to push harder. I wanted my hands to be the first hands to hold all of you, my father often told us. I wanted you to know the hands that would protect you. When my mother finally contracted Micah from her body, he didn't make a sound. Slick with blood and membrane, his eyes stared around the room but took in nothing. Our mother was too drained to lift him. My father wrapped him in blankets and laid him on the bed between them. Micah didn't cry until she touched him. Autism is marked by abnormal introversion and egocentricity. Autism is not a personality disorder. It is a developmental disorder with a spectrum of symptoms so varied as to be almost unique to each individual. Emotional expression varies. Verbal skills vary. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Not all autistic people are idiot savants. Not all autistic people are mentally retarded. No one knows what creates autism. No one can bring it to light. Not all lights can be adjusted. Not all lights can help you to see. If autism could create photographs, each one would be overexposed, a light strong enough to burn us to it, pictures that needle the nerves. My mother was pregnant when she met my father. She was early on, so neither of them knew it. Micah was the culmination of a 2-year love between my mother and a man named Jamie. He was from a well-off Sacramento family deep in law and politics. She worked behind the counter of a Dairy Queen, part-time while she studied at the university where they met. She still smiles when she speaks of Jamie, how it took her months to work up the nerve to speak to him. She sighs, she shakes her head. I was crazy for him. A month before she met my father, Jamie broke up with her, said they got along too well, not enough charisma together. She agreed with him too often, etc. She cried and walked to and from her job at the Dairy Queen where my father was becoming a regular. He said he liked the way she stirred the shakes and asked her out. They'd only been out a few times when she learned that she was 2 months pregnant. She told my father and he said, "Marry me. But it's not your baby. Marry me anyway." But then Jamie came back into the scene. He said he didn't love her, but he didn't want an illegitimate child coming back to haunt his future political career, which, by the way, he never had. My mother told him she would marry my father, and Jamie changed his mind, wanted her, wanted to fight my father. It's the famous scene with the 2 men in the yard with their fists clenched like fleshy bouquets, my mother waiting in the open air, her hands across the slight swell of her belly. My father says, "You're going to fight me, rich boy? Think for a minute. How many fights do you think I've been in? How many fights do you think you've been in?" I imagine my father had just arrived home from work, his tanned arms and shoulders tense beneath a swath of dirt. Jamie thought better of it and sunk into silence, turned away. The marriage took place in a park, everyone in embroidered muslin with flower wreaths in their hair. In the wedding slides there is a picture, my mother in a sunspot, looking down at her belly, swollen like a moon over her bare feet. She holds my father's hand. He is in a shadow, his wild hair and eyes as dark as curling leaves. He's looking just out of the frame to something disconcerting in the distance. Turn away. It's easy to turn away. It's much easier than looking directly. Don't look here. Don't look at me. My brother walks quickly with his head down, arms stiff at his side, moving back and forth mechanically, or he paces. He paces around the room sometimes and is unable to stop making repetitive motions and sounds, fragments of sentences, noises that have no connection to the context, screech, yelp, pop, clap. He hits himself in the head, stupid, retard. When strangers come, he keeps to the corners, twitching and grinning wide, but unable to approach, afraid to approach. The strangers, I mean, are afraid to approach. They don't know what he'll do. They don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for him, for them, for myself. A brave stranger holds out his hand and walks toward Micah slowly, speaking evenly, as if Micah were a stray dog let into the house. My father says, amused, "Say hi, Micah." Micah grins like a stray dog led into the house. I turn away. It's easier to turn away. I was born. A year later, Mount St. Helens erupted. Ash covered my parents' land in Riderwood, Washington, and made it barren. They moved to the city. My father got a job working construction. Days they argued about the money they didn't have, and nights he stayed out later and later. My sister Jasmine was born, then Malia. We couldn't survive on his paychecks. My mother got a job as a waitress, working nights at Pancake Corner, hoping she'd make enough to help. She'd come in late and kiss our elbows to check if we were sleeping. There was no way to tell her what was happening when she was gone. My father came home each day from the job site, red-eyed and slowed, landed heavily on our dying sofa, untied his construction boots 1 notch at a time. We were allowed to play in the yard if it was raining, and to watch TV, if it wasn't raining, and to watch TV if it was, and then he'd drink and keep drinking, cracking open can after can of cheap beer. If we were quiet enough, he'd pass out in the shifting blue light of the television screen, and we could brush our teeth, tiptoe to bed, and lie awake, waiting for our mother to come home. We were safe when our mother got home. Sometimes I pretended to sleep when she came into my room. Sometimes I sat up to say hi, and she'd shush me back down. How was your night? Good, I'd say. How could I tell her what was happening? What I mean to say is my father beat him, almost every day. It became ritual. My brother would begin his questions or rock or mumble or laugh to himself, which would instigate my father. I always come back to this, the tones of fault. Micah instigates. He gets what he asks for. It's the voice of my father explaining himself again. Micah's downstairs in the room, shaking. Mama's at work, so can't wedge herself between them like she does when she's home. It gets out of hand. It always gets out of hand. And then my father comes to find us girls to explain that he loves us all. But your brother has problems. He makes things very hard. You know how hard he makes everything. And I'm so tired, I just don't have the patience. And then he just won't stop, you know? I don't mean it to get out of hand, but he keeps at me. And besides, who knows how much he remembers, understands. My father's really lovely when he's calm, so strong and lovely. He lifts the air to make us believe. This is the voice of the magician who could wave his hand and be kind or cruel, who could carry us on his back or bare his teeth or make us completely disappear. I've heard the story so many times it becomes myth. My brother is not my brother, but the archetype of brothers. We heard him in a bedtime story. We keep him shut. Light never falls on him. I can pace around the violence of the room, the small opening in my memory, create a story that I can walk away from. The myth of the boy raised by wolves, the myth of the coward, the story in which I am transformed into a tree. Who knows how much he remembers, understands, my roots digging down into silence. Cowardice is marked by ignoble fear in the face of danger or pain. Autistic people have an atypical sense of and response to fear. My brother is terrified if approached unannounced, but might walk into interstate traffic if no one redirects him. Autism is not caused by bad parenting. It is thought to be the result of abnormal brain development, particularly in the cerebellum and the limbic system. Abnormal brain development can be caused by almost anything and often doesn't result in autism. Danger and pain can be caused by almost anything and often doesn't result in cowardice. Cowardice is an adjustable opening in one's psyche that limits the amount of light that can enter. I don't remember how it started, if there was anything to start it. My father came home red-eyed and wired, ready for a fight. Micah said something, did something, I don't know. I can't remember. I grabbed Jasmine and Malia and ran up the stairs with them to my room, stayed there holding their heads to my shoulders, covering their ears so they couldn't hear. I heard everything, but couldn't make a complete scene of it. Clips of violence without context, wailing, falling, scraping, yelling, something wooden against the wall, my brother against the wall. They moved around the house in a circle, my father approaching, my brother retreating until they reached my brother's room, just below mine, where the worst of it rose up through the floorboards, fist to rib to back to thigh, the breath knocked out of him and knocked out of him, a choking sound, a dense thud. Then it stopped suddenly, like a sharp exhale. I heard my father's boots across the living room, out the front door, the door slamming shut behind him. I let my hands drop to my sides. Jasmine and Malia slumped against each other, whimpering. I pulled a blanket from my bed to cover them, then edged my way carefully down the stairs, the lit hallway, to Micah's room. When I opened his door, a sliver of light pointed across the dark to his pale form crouched in the corner, head between his knees, one arm over his neck, the other reaching up, flat palm trembling. I stood there a while behind the light without telling him it was me, without giving him reason to uncoil. I knew beneath his lids his eyes were swollen from crying, and I did nothing. The light opened him to me, a narrow slit adjusting in my psyche, and I was a silhouette watching his skinny arm raised toward my shadow. It's just me, I said finally. When he heard my voice, he let his arms down slowly. I'm just here to see if you're okay. He dropped his arms down completely, then looked up, glassy-eyed, to a spot above my head. The light? Does he see me at all? Who knows how much he remembers, understands. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah? Yeah, I'm fine now, I'm fine. I walked into the unlit room, shut the door behind me, and sat down on the edge of the bed. He got up from the corner and sat next to me. The room was opaque at first, but slowly my eyes adjusted so that I could see him. A light shone in from somewhere, glossing his face in silver. I can't remember how long we sat there in silence. I'm sorry, I said finally. Why are you sorry? You didn't do anything. But I didn't have an answer. I stood in Ockley Green Middle School's field, a short expanse of matted-down grass and dirt patches hemmed in by a chain-link fence that separated the milling students from the traffic of Interstate Avenue. Keisha's thick form, made thicker by a black down parka, walked briskly out of the heavy metal doors and across the field to me. She was caramel-colored and lovely, her hair always slicked back into a spiky black ponytail, her eyes a disarming hazel. Micah's your brother, right? Whenever she brought up my brother, she always began this way, as if at any moment I would reveal that all along I'd been lying. Her suspicions were valid. Until a few months ago, she didn't even know I had a brother. I didn't sit with him at lunch or even talk to him in the hallways. If I happened to pass him, I'd wave hello and he'd wave back, speed along in his brisk, twitching walk, his permanent grin. But nobody paid attention in the hallways, so nobody knew. I'd only mentioned he was my brother a few months ago because she and I were talking to Giovanni and Alfonso, two boys from our class, when they started, perhaps to impress us, making fun of the retard by the fence. Micah paced back and forth beneath the huge Douglas fir, talking to himself, sometimes laughing, smashing his hands over his mouth. It made me angry. Actually, that's not cool, I started, but the guys kept laughing. What, like he's your best friend or something? Alfonso rolled his face near mine. Ah, that's sweet. You love him, Gio said, placing his hands over his heart as if swooning. Yeah, actually, I do, I said, deadpan. You sweat that retard boy? Keisha's exclamation was sincere. She'd been trying to get me to say who I had a crush on for weeks, but I wouldn't tell her. James, of course, with his champion smile and confident stride, the most popular boy in school, and black, which meant I was doubly cursed to remain unnoticed. He'd never leave the top social echelon of the middle school students to date a geeky white girl, no matter how elegant a way I found to tell him, so it was best to keep my crush to myself. No, he's my brother. They stopped laughing and took a few steps away from me, their eyebrows arched, their hands half over their mouths. They did this in perfect unison, as if they had practiced it. Really? Keisha said. Really. But they didn't believe me yet. Micah has his father's face, with the Mexican hair and eyes from our mother's side of the family, dark brown, almost black. I look just like my father, through and through. No Latina beauty for me. Blue-gray eyes and pale skin. There's nothing in either of our faces that might hint we're from the same genetic pool. Their logic, no one except family would be brave enough to talk to the strange wild boy beneath the pine. I walked across the field at a steady pace while Keisha and the boys followed, though at a distance. When everyone was close enough to hear me, I spoke to him, perhaps more loudly than I needed to. Hey, Micah. Hey, Danielle, he said, mimicking my tone and head gesture, one of his favorite games. He didn't stop walking. I stood there for a moment, watching him walk briskly in a long figure 8, wondering what I would say to prove that he was my brother. How strange to make a theater of relation. Did Mom tell you what she was making for dinner tonight? No, what is she making? I don't know, I was asking you. Oh, yeah, I don't know, I hope it's spaghetti, he said in my general direction, though not directly at my face. Yeah, me too. I looked over his shoulder to the amazed threesome behind, making the same shocked gestures and faces as before. My stomach sank. How strange to have to make a theater of relation. They should have already known he was my brother. Ever since, Keisha liked to give me updates on Micah's progress in their biology class. I never asked her to. I knew she did this mostly out of fascination for his disorder and partly out of affection for me. It was her way of apologizing for having laughed at him before she knew he was my brother. She would give me a list of behaviors and want me to explain them in clinical terms. I'd never read anything on autism. Like everyone else, all of my official learning about autism came from the movie Rain Man, which didn't explain much about Micah. Keisha hadn't shown up in my life until that year, 7th grade English class with Ms. Hanson. We were on the advanced track for English and writing, while the other students in the school were placed elsewhere in the intellectual hierarchy, on track, remedial, and special ed. My brother is 2 years older than me, but was only a year ahead of me in school and in a special ed class. He met with his homeroom teacher in the first half of the day and was integrated into regular classrooms in subjects he could manage. This was supposed to give him experience in normative social interaction, as if middle school students anywhere were normal. In elementary school, he had a small group of friends from his special ed class that sat together at lunch and went to each other's birthday parties. They were occasionally teased by the other kids for their strange outbursts or looming stares, but mostly they were left alone and sometimes treated kindly. But in middle school, everyone was at the mercy of the masses, and the masses were decidedly unmerciful. Anything not status quo was responded to with humiliation or violence. I need a sip of water. Mike is your brother, right? You already know the answer to that. Did you hear what happened in class today? No. He started freaking out. Those mean white boys kept poking at him and calling him names, and all of a sudden he started throwing things and screaming. Everyone had to get under the desk. It was like Desert Storm up in there. He started throwing rocks, books, a microscope. No one could get him to stop. By mean white boys, she meant the Sidmore boys, who'd taken to chasing him home from school, barking at him and throwing rocks at his head. They were the squinty-eyed blondes who sweared before every noun and came to school with dirty clothes and sometimes bruised cheeks. Mr. Raoul started yelling at him. God, that's the last wrong thing to do. Yeah, but what are you supposed to do when he gets like that? I don't know, but not that. You don't know? I don't know. He's got his own brain. I don't know what he's thinking all the time. I know what he was thinking, she said. I'm not going to take it anymore. Who knows what he's thinking? Who knows how much he remembers from anything, how much he understands? My father left the house in the middle of December, my junior year of high school, and he didn't come back. Everyone fell into a deep silence. Temperance was strange to all of us. It filled the spaces of the house like stars, distant, bright. Micah began to see a counselor, a specialist in high-functioning autism. I didn't pay much attention. Turning inward, reading and writing in my room, concerned with the small dramas of my adolescent life. My mother told me one afternoon that Micah told his counselor that he knew something was wrong with him. Something is wrong with my brain, he said, tapping his temple, and I want my brain to be better. He worked with this counselor trying to forge new neural pathways that would help him connect. Micah began keeping a diary of progress and a list of social goals. Say hello to people. Ask how they are feeling. Give someone a compliment. Wait patiently in line. When you are feeling frustrated or angry, go for a walk. Do not scream at people, hit them, or throw things at them no matter how angry you get. Do not follow Latrice if she does not want you to. Micah had a crush on a girl from his high school whom he followed around, wide-eyed, everywhere she went. She was taller than him, African American, and had more than twice his body mass. He couldn't stop telling her how beautiful she was. Will you be my girlfriend? Will you be my girlfriend? I love you. But he was a joke to her. She laughed and kept laughing until one day she asked if he had any money. He explained he received $75 from his father for Christmas and had kept it in a bank account. She told him if he gave her the money, she would be his girlfriend. He gave her the money. From then on, she spat at him whenever he went near her. She gathered groups of friends to jeer at him, throw dirt clods at his head. This didn't dissuade him because she had clearly stated before the exchange that she would be his girlfriend if he gave her the money, and he believed her. My brother's love affair finally ended one afternoon when he tried to touch her shoulder to stop her from turning away, and she punched him in the face, called him retard, and walked away laughing. He understood violence, the way it maintains the boundaries between people. He realized, if only tangentially, that he wasn't real to her. He was a boy in a movie, a story of someone else's life, a fragmented object, a spectacle. Common symptoms of autism. Impairments in verbal and nonverbal communication present from early childhood. The inability to lie, and worse, not even thinking to lie. And even worse, believing what people say, and the worst, not judging anyone for lying or telling the truth, as lies only cause confusion, because life is confusing enough. Immediacy. That is, acute awareness of sensory input, being always in the moment. Abnormalities of social interaction, severely stunted ability to control or manipulate social interaction, lack of skill in emotional manipulation, not mindful of the distinctions between class, race, gender, body mass, age, disability, that is, not knowing to behave differently toward people because of these distinctions, a lack of regard for social expectations, idiosyncratic displays of confusion toward neurotypical cognitions, confusing reactions to emotional displays, dishonesty or violence, having too much passion for things or people, a restricted repertoire of interests, a memory full of sharp detail, directions, colors, dates, names, repetitive acts, repetition. Flinch away. Look in the other direction. I give you permission. Turn your head from the scene. You don't know how he'll react if he finds you watching. It's scary, sure, of course it is. Push him to the margins of the page, as I have. Don't you feel better now? There he is on the periphery, walking in the field beneath the pine tree. Or he's not there. He's somewhere else, farther from the line of sight. It's easy to forget him because who knows how much he remembers, understands. He flinches away, you flinch away. It's easy to miss each other. You feel better now, don't you? It's almost as if he doesn't exist. This is easier for you. And when I say you, I mean me. Because I'm a coward. Cowardice is. Cowardice is an opening. Cowardice is an adjustable opening in one's psyche that limits the amount of light that can enter. One morning in the kitchen, Micah didn't flinch when I walked into the room. He didn't sulk or stamp his feet or send me sharp eyes. Instead, he stared at me, anxious. I knew this meant he wanted to speak to me, but I ignored him, pretended to be absorbed in pouring my cereal, milk, lifting each spoonful to my mouth, stirring my tea, smoothing my hair, anything other than give him attention. The winter light outside swirled on the glossy linoleum, and somewhere in his head he was trying to speak to me. But I didn't care. I said goodbye as I left the kitchen, and he remained silent at my back. The next morning we went through the same actions. I walked into the room, and he looked straight at me, his eyes huge, direct, full of speech, but he was silent. I ignored him, who knows what he's thinking, and attended to the same cereal ritual. All through my meal, I could feel him looking at me. After I took my last bite, I looked at him, and he immediately looked at his bowl of soggy cereal. Okay, fine, what? What is it? Just tell me, but say it quick. Danielle? Yes? Did you know that I love you? I stared at him. He stared back. I guess I figured, but you never said so. Oh, yeah. I said it now, though. Yeah, thanks. Because my counselor told me to write a list, see? He pulled a badly crumpled piece of yellowed paper out of his pocket that had a short list in black ink. I was too far away to read it. What's it a list of? People I love. See, you're here. He points to a scribble on the page. Because you're my sister. Because you're nice to me when Dad is mean. Remember? Remember what? When Dad was mean and you came to see me, I couldn't speak, light like a lump in the throat. He went on, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay if you can't remember. I remember. Yeah, it's okay if you can't remember. I was in my room, on the floor, and you were there, at the door, inside the light." And I'm going to end with one poem. It's a brand new poem, hasn't been published anywhere, so I don't know, maybe we can have a suggestion box, you can come talk to me afterwards and let me know if it's any good. But I was sort of playing with the idea of nonfiction, and I always like to end a reading on a love poem, so this is a love poem, and it's called True. You had a headache. I drew the dark curtains and you closed your eyes. This is verifiable. The dark was like a closed mouth or the interior petals of a white peony. My heart beat arrhythmically, but only for a moment. This is true. Outside, it was day, a rainy day in the northwest, so somewhat dim, but bright enough to light the falling rain. I'm trying to be specific. Your hair smelled of eucalyptus oil and lavender. I placed my palm on your rough cheek. This, I swear. Your headache arrived after too much wine and laughter. I can't remember what made us laugh. True is the name for whatever corresponds to our idea of truth. In the atriums of my chest, there is a palimpsest. I couldn't decipher the old script, but knew something in me was worn away. I was frightened. You swooned in the dark room, and I touched your closed eyelids softly to feel the roll of the dream beneath them. You hummed in your sleep. Your humming cleaned that sound from my memory, rewrote itself anew. What I knew as true no longer corresponds. You erase everything written before you. Thank you very much for having me here. Yes.
Did you ever or do you at all cry when you think about or read your book, especially that short story?
The question was, do I cry when I think about the? Yeah, it's a difficult piece for me to read. There's always this. I'm always really terrified that I'm actually going to cry during a reading because I saw somebody do that once at a nonfiction reading. She was reading something. She started crying in the middle of it and then couldn't stop. She just kept, she was really sobbing and everybody was just so embarrassed. And I don't want to put anybody in. I feel like I'm going into so much, sort of emotional trauma anyway, in the reading itself that if I myself, seem like I'm being emotionally traumatized by my own work, then I don't know, the universe is going to fall apart or something. Yes.
You refer to yourself in that essay, you call yourself a coward. Do you still consider yourself a coward, and do you feel you got over that?
The question was, do I still consider myself a coward? It's something that I wrote in the book. I don't know. I feel like in a lot of ways, the writing of this essay and the publication of it, and finally saying what was happening in the household, is in many ways, for my own emotional catharsis, a way for me to stop being a coward. Because the thing I think I felt most guilty about for not, more even than coming to my brother's rescue, which I had tried to do several times, which I didn't talk about in the essay, which was nearly impossible because of my father's wrath. But also, I just didn't tell anybody that I knew him or that he was my brother, and that's the very center of the guilt of that. And so I still feel like a coward when I think about those particular moments, but in some ways I think in writing it, in claiming him, to express my love and to show that he did remember. He remembers quite well everything that happened. Was sort of partly my way of showing my love for him, and partly my way of trying to be brave. Yes, right here.
You said that you think of the first poem in a book as a point of inquiry. I was
Mhm.
wondering if you think of the first essay in your collection as sort of the same way.
The question was, do I consider the first essay to be a point of inquiry in a book of essays as well as a poetry? Yes, I think that I do. The very first essay in here is just one really quick, it's called A Still Life, and it's of my father's passed out on the floor, and we're trying to leave. My mother tried to leave him several times, but she was a single mom of 4 children and economically just couldn't do it, and then couldn't split us up, or didn't want to split us up, which is the only other option. But yes, so the first one, The Still Life, I think frames in a lot of way the familial struggles that happen throughout the book. Yes. The question is, how's Micah doing now? Micah it's interesting because he was diagnosed with autism pretty early on, and this is kind of early in the whole discovery of autism and the whole spectrum of it. And they think now that he actually has Asperger's, not autism, because he's so highly functioning. He was working as a janitor at the airport for a very long time. I'm in touch with him often. He calls me often, usually when he's bored. That's what he decides. But he's taking medication at this point to try to help him interact with people in a more sort of socially acceptable way. Though the medication does have some bad side effects. It makes him really lethargic, and it does things like make him bored, which would never be if he were just his regular self. But he's so highly functioning that he actually ended up marrying someone. Right, for a while, but that was really, it was difficult circumstances because she was also a special needs person, and so it ended up being my mother sort of mitigating their relationship or trying to take care. They eventually got a divorce because they argued so readily. But my brother, he lives in Portland. He lives on his own in an apartment, and we talk about movies mostly is what we do. But he's fine now. I think that's all we have time for.